Good afternoon and welcome to my lecture about Latin American guitar. I chose the title for this presentation, De la raíz a la copa, which by the way means from the roots to the treetops, because I believe it really illustrates very clearly the contents of what I'm going to be talking about for the next hour. It also happens to be the name of a guitar piece by an Argentinian guitarist, composer, and folklorist by the name of Juan Falú, who also has dedicated his life to the dissemination of Argentinian music and folklore throughout the world. Latin America has an incredibly rich and varied culture, and it's product of the mixing of three traditions: the African heritage, obviously the European heritage, and the Native American heritage. It took centuries for this integration to happen, and it wasn't painless or bloodless. The Atlantic slave trade, the extermination or forced displacement of the natives, and the imposed sentiments of European superiority played a major role in the shaping of Latin American culture and therefore its music. For today's lecture, however, I won't be focusing on music from Latin America in general, but I'll be focusing on the music that has been produced for the guitar in Latin America. It all began with the first colonizers. When the Spanish started to settle in the New World, they brought with them an instrument that was uniquely Hispanic, which is the vihuela. It's that instrument that you can see over there. While everybody else in Europe was playing the lute, the Spanish had created their own version of a plucked, stringed, fretted chordophone. Now, why didn't the Spanish like the lute, or why didn't they want to play the lute like the rest of Europe? The reason is very simple. It reminded the Spanish of 800 years or so of Moorish occupation of the South. And why is that? Because the lute is an Arab invention. The lute began in antiquity and during the Middle Ages to develop as a very important instrument with the Moors, and then they transported it to Europe, and there it transformed into the European lute that we all have seen, at least in paintings, that pear-shaped instrument. But the Spanish, they lost the entire South to the Moors between the 7th and 8th centuries and 1492, when they were finally expelled. So they held a little bit of a grudge against the lute because of that. So they, instead of adopting the lute like everybody else in Europe, they created their own fretted, plucked string instrument capable of producing the same quality of music as the lute. And that was the vihuela over there. You can see that the vihuela has double strings, or as we call them, courses. And it has five courses of double strings and one single string at the bottom. And that was the common use and common tuning back in those days. The lutes also shared that kind of string arrangement. And it indeed was a very beautiful and sophisticated instrument. Great amounts of high quality music were created during the 16th century in Spain, including the works of one of the most influential Spanish composers and vihuelists of the time, who was Luis de Narvaez. Narvaez was a vihuelist and composer that worked in the court of King Charles V, who was a music enthusiast and amateur and had a particular love for the French chanson, especially one by Josquin des Prez called Mille Regrets, that the king was really fond of. Narvaez knew this, and he arranged this song, which was vocal, it was for mixed choir. He arranged it for the vihuela and made it an instrumental piece that was a very popular tradition between the lute players and the vihuela players in the Renaissance in Europe. They would arrange music that was originally vocal and transpose it and transcribe it for an instrumental means like the lute or the vihuela. And that practice was called entabulation because the system of notation that they used was basically a tablature, as we know today, which is each line represents each string, or each chorus in this case, and the numbers, they represent the frets that the player is supposed to stop with the fingers on the left hand in order to produce any particular piece. And then on top of that, you have rhythmic notation, like quavers, semiquavers, or eighth notes, 16th notes, quarter notes as we know them here in the United States. And that was a very common practice during the Renaissance and a little bit during the Baroque too. So there's a story that says that he played it every morning. Narvaez, working for Charles V in his court, he played this song every morning during the king's breakfast. I don't know if it's true or not, but there's that story has stayed with us for a long time. Before I talk about the four-chords guitar, I'm going to play the entabulation of this piece. As you can see, I have a capo on the 3rd fret of my guitar, and that's because I'm trying to approximate the tuning of the early vihuela, which is an instrument that was much higher in tune than the guitar. I usually don't do this. I'm doing it today for the lecture purposes, so I apologize if I make mistakes because it's a little bit confusing to transpose everything to this area. So this is Mil Regrets, or as Narvaez titled it in Spanish, Canción del Emperador.